and spending it in a way that does such tremendous good in the world, and where you can see how what you say and do influences such a huge chunk of government money. Are you starting to get excited yet again? I really hope so, because every time I stop and think about the scale and the scope of what we've achieved and what we do, I'm just awed and humbled. And at the risk of sounding cheesy, we really do get results. So if you're new to the issues that Results works on, you might possibly be daunted about the idea that you can have any meaningful impact on such a big financial target as billions and billions of pounds. But trust us, you absolutely can. So let me give you one example. In 2016, the then Secretary of State, Priti Patel, wrote a cheque for £1.1 billion only a few weeks after taking office. That was to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. And it was absolutely not a foregone conclusion that she would go and do that and come in at that level. But she'd heard from backbench MPs of all parties, particularly Tories, but all parties, many of whom you had contacted, that TB was a big deal and it mattered to them and it mattered to their constituencies. And she responded accordingly. There's absolutely everything to play for in the coming year. There's an important government spending review happening in 2019, and the government should be expecting to continue funding its international development commitments. It's our job to make sure that their level of ambition doesn't fall short of what's needed in the face of lots of domestic spending pressure and the distraction of Brexit and all of the people that are saying that Britain needs to focus all of its energies at home. Some of you may have read recent reports that the quality of UK aid is falling, which is a big concern to us. One reason that's been suggested for this fall in the quality of our aid is that 50% of UK aid now goes to fragile and conflict-affected states, where it's harder to attain and to measure good development outcomes. But I don't entirely buy that explanation, as countries like Ireland and Denmark have for a long time focused on fragile states, and they're still rated really well on their development programs. Results initial analysis indicates that there's quite a strong correlation between these drops in effectiveness and who is spending the money. So increasingly, government departments other than DFID, such as the Foreign Office, the Ministry of Defence, and the Ministry for International Trade, who aren't development experts, are becoming responsible for the spending, often as bilateral aid. That's aid from our country to other countries directly without going through an organisation like the Global Fund or Gavi. Experts from across the sector agree that these other government departments just aren't so good at or as focused on poverty reduction. So that's a really big concern to us, and one we're going to be keeping an eye on in our advocacy work. It's why, for example, we've been concerned about the government's change of focus in its international development strategy, and why putting our own national interest at the centre of development, particularly in this context, is absolutely the wrong thing to do. In contrast, the funding commitments that we've been talking about in Results, these important health multilaterals, they are crystal clear examples of good aid. That's aid that targets those most in need, that focuses firmly on poverty eradication, and are a really efficient and effective use of taxpayers' money. There is, of course, more to be done to improve them, but you could say that about almost anything in all of human life. But these initiatives have been rated highly both by DFID's own reviews and by a whole pile of independent monitors and analysts. When we hear reports of aid being spent less effectively, it's not these funds that should be being criticised. We've got a really good person to be working with on this in the shape of our present Secretary of State for International Development, Penny Mordaunt. At New Year's, she produced a video message on social media about her belief in the importance of the global goals, which we're going to be hearing about later on this call. And earlier in December, in response to World AIDS Day, which is on the 1st of December, she released a written ministerial statement on the AIDS epidemic in which she set out her commitment to the Global Fund. This is a rare event, and such a statement only happens if a minister is personally committed to an issue. So that's a great sign when we come to work on Global Fund replenishment a bit later on this year. You can find her New Year message on the DFID Twitter feed, but we're going to put links to that and to the Hansard record of her written ministerial statement in the chat box in just a second. As I said, this month, we're returning to the topic of the global goals, these 17 goals which all the nations of the United Nations agreed back in 2015, setting out the vision of a world free of poverty and with sustainable development and environmental policies by the year 2030. That's just 11 years away now. I'm not going to do a lot of talking about the goals right now because that's what our guest speaker is going to be doing. I'm going to introduce him in just a minute. But from a results perspective, when those goals were introduced, we thought they were so important that we based the next iteration of our strategic plan on them. So it's actually and literally written into all of our work that we're here to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030 through these goals. So all the monthly actions we ask you to take on specific issues on health, education, and economic opportunity are all, we believe, very necessary to help achieve that vision. The replenishment work for those big health multilateral organisations I've just been talking about is all about ending extreme poverty by 2030. Every letter or visit to an MP that you make is about that. When our staff come into the office every weekday morning, that's why they're doing it. And while it's not a foregone conclusion that we're going to succeed, there's plenty of evidence that things are going in the right direction, but this may not continue to be the case if we don't keep our politicians focused on doing the right thing, and often as they can when we ask them to. Some of you might have seen the link in this month's action materials to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Goalkeeper Report, which is an excellent source of data on how we're doing against the ambition of the global goals. And this is going to be published every year to see how much work still needs to be done. That link should be popping up again in your chat box while we talk. But like I said, it's in the action materials as well. Absolutely worth a read. Our speaker this month is going to be able to share a lot more about what's happening at the UN to ensure countries are living up to their commitments under the global goals and how that can be influenced what we do here in the UK. But before I introduce him, I'd like to hand over to Hannah as usual, who's going to share what you've been doing around the country over the last month. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Aaron, and Happy New Year, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me okay, and I hope that you're all feeling refreshed after the Christmas break and ready for another busy year of campaigning. So as Aaron said, I'll be giving the usual round of activities from around the network over the last month. Firstly, last month we suggested a number of actions to keep you busy over the festive period. So thank you to all of you who took one or all of the December actions. We heard that a number of you, from our groups in Macclesfield to our groups in Stork Valley, sent Christmas cards and a successful 2019 Global Fund replenishment to your MPs, and also promoted the importance of universal health coverage on UHC Day, which is the 12th of December. I know that Jill from the Stork Valley group went along to a carol concert as she knew that her MP, Mark Prisk, would be there. She handed him his card in person and told him how many lives have been saved by UK aid through his constituency support. So a big well done to Jill for managing to sneak in a quick MP visit before Christmas. Also in December, the London group hosted a Christmas soiree event to celebrate the group's achievements of 2018 and make some plans for 2019. I was able to go along and I heard some great plans being made. So we look forward to hearing how these all go over the next couple of months. We've also received some more interesting replies from your letters to and meetings with your MP on nutrition back in October and November. I know that Mark from the Norwich group had a great result from his contact with George Freeman MP. George Freeman has agreed to raise a parliamentary question to Penny Mordaunt, who's the Secretary of State for International Development, on what plans the government has to increase its financial contributions to combating malnutrition. So really big well done to Mark, and we'll of course let you know when we hear more on this. Again, Mark also had a really great follow-up piece on last year's high-level meeting on TB, published in the medical journal Pathology and Practice. I've got the printout here, if you can all see. So it's a big sort of 2-pager. And as you can see, it's very sort of substantial and impressive, and it's reached a whole new audience to explain why more research and funding for TB is so urgently needed. So this is really impressive, and another well done to Mark. Lastly, I also just wanted to share with you all some news. I'm sadly leaving the grassroots team at Results UK. I'm very sad to leave, however I'm not moving too far away as I'm taking up a new position as the campaigns officer at Send My Friend to School, which many of you will know is hosted by Results UK, and Results are also a member of the Send My Friend Coalition, who are involved in campaigning for education for all and achieving the Sustainable Development Goal of education for all by 2030. And this year Send My Friend are campaigning particularly to reach the most marginalised children, mainly girls, children living in conflict and children with disabilities, which Results are also going to be involved with that campaign. So I'm really pleased to still be involved with Results and the Grassroots Network, and I look forward to working with you all on this campaign as it progresses. But I am sad to leave Results as well, so I just want to say it's been a real privilege working with you all and campaigning together for a world without extreme poverty. But I'm sure that I will see lots of you soon, and probably at the Results National Conference in the summer. So before I pass back to Aaron to introduce tonight's speaker, is there anybody else who would like to share something from what's happened over the network in the last month or so?
Just allowed to boo you leaving, Hannah. Is that socially acceptable?
I know, I'm going to miss you all.
Good luck, Hannah.
Thank you very much, everybody. So yeah, and as always, a massive thank you from all of us in the office, and particularly a massive thank you from me this evening. It's been great working with you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all the great things that you do in 2019. So thank you very much, and I'll now pass back to Aaron.
Thanks, Hannah. You will, of course, be tremendously missed, although I know we're your new seat in the offices and it's not so far away from your old seat. So we're really pleased to still have you in the building and still working so hard on such a great initiative. Thank you so much for everything you've done. So let's kick over to get onto the topic of tonight's call. At the moment, the UK is preparing to report to the United Nations. We've got a big report due this coming July about how we as a nation are doing to meet the commitments that we signed up to around the global goals in 2015. As you'll gather from my earlier remarks, it's absolutely vital that this isn't just a silly paper exercise or about trying to make us look good on a global stage, but that it is in fact a genuine exercise in critical reflection that will help us direct our energies even more firmly towards eradicating extreme poverty by 2030. So it's really my great pleasure to introduce Paul Abernethy. He's an old friend of Results. Not he's old, he's an old friend of Results. We've been working closely for some years. It is quite a long way back, actually. Certainly back in 2015 when the global goals were introduced. So Paul, welcome to the call. Hello.
Hi everyone, and thanks Aaron. No, I think I am feeling a bit old, to be honest, so I think it's both an old friend in age and in time. But yeah, thanks so much for asking me to come. I think it's just, I just want to start off by saying how impressive everyone is on this call. I work for Bond currently, which I'll explain a bit more in a second. But before that, in a previous life, I worked for an organisation called Global Citizen, which were quite similar to Results in the sense of the same issues. They campaign on the same issues.
I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, is this any better at all?
Your voice is changing level. Have you got a mobile microphone or something?
If you give me 1 minute, I might be able to help. I might be able to sort of know.
Well, tell you what, Paul, why don't you do that, and I'll finish reading the incredibly impressive introduction I actually have for you, so they know who you are. So you sort that out, and I'll read out your bio. So while Paul sorts out his microphone, let me just tell you a little bit more about who he is. As he mentioned, he works for Bond. He actually leads the political advocacy of Bond. And Bond is the coordination body for all of us international development NGOs. There's a few hundred of us that have joined. He works with parliamentarians and ministers in support of ending global poverty. He's got over 10 years of experience working in public affairs and campaigns. And in his current role, he also coordinates the Secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group on the Sustainable Development Goals. So he's in a perfect position to help us understand the processes around the UK government's approach to the goals writ large. So Paul, obviously I've welcomed you once to the call already. So you've sort of seen a bit who's on the call, but let me introduce them to you all in a bit more depth. You know, we've got volunteer campaigners, as you've seen from the different geographies typed under people's faces. They're from all over the UK. They're united by a passion for taking action to end global poverty. And of course, they're all really looking forward to what you have to say. And as you've sort of heard, as you've been on the call from the start, they're all pretty active in terms of really doing very concrete things in support of the global goals and of ending poverty. Some of the people on the call have been advocating around international development for many, many years, but some are brand new this evening. But everybody's looking forward to what you have to say. As is normal on most of these calls, we've got 3 pre-arranged questions for you. We're going to open up the floor. You can start right now, everybody. For those of you on your computers, please feel free to get questions lined up using the chat function on the side of the screen. For those of you that are on telephones, you can text in if you prefer to do that. The number tonight for texting, grab your pen, is 0777 56 111 78. That's 0777 56 111 78. And we, of course, will, for those that are not able to text and not able to type in the chat box, we'll go for a shout out at some stage as well. So before we go to these questions, and so you can check out your microphone solution, Paul, as I often do, I'd like to start by asking people to tell us a little bit about themselves and why they got into the role that they currently have. What is it that drives you in your role at Bond, and why are you so interested in international development?
Is this working? Is this any better?
That sounds great so far.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I was worried that this wasn't going to work. So what got me into international development? I kind of almost, so I've been campaigning for over 10 years now, and I almost fell into this job. I was always interested in, so I did public relations at university, and I was always interested in how like campaigns were put together and how you develop messages and how you helped try to change people's mind and influence them. And I very much, just as a fallout from that, I managed to get a place into my student union, and then I saw the power of campaigning, and I saw how like normal students, normal people could change. At the time, I was saying change the world, obviously changing their campus, but in fact, for a lot of people, that is kind of changing their world. I saw the impact of what students could have, and it got me really interested in this. So I then went on to work in student unions. I became my student union president. After that, I went to do some national stuff. And I was very much involved in higher education campaigning for the best part of 6 years, which led me to a senior manager role at a students' union. And as much as I loved it, and which I really did, I think student unions are incredible places for change. I started to take note of all the much wider global implications of what was happening in the world. So I always knew that it was just your typical I was your typical person. I knew that. I saw the children on TV who were starving. I saw that people didn't have access to clean water, but I didn't know too much about it. But the more and more I read into it, the more I realised actually these are very serious issues, but they can be fixed. And so I kind of started to get an inkling to want to work in international development. So I tried my best to get a few jobs, and I managed to land a role with Global Citizen in the end. And I had some great years with them, working with results, quite closely with results, especially on polio eradication. And then this job came up at Bond. Bond is an organisation, a very interesting organisation. So as Aaron said, we're the membership organisation for around 400 international development charities and NGOs in the UK. And these range for everyone from your massive, huge organisations like Save the Children, who have thousands of employees around the world, to just your charities who may have like one person volunteering, who are based in someone's flat in Manchester, for instance. We go right across the spectrum. And a job came up with these guys, an organisation I've always admired, and it was too good to turn down. So yeah, now I look after their government relations work, and it's quite interesting because I get to work with loads of fantastic organisations, including Results. I get to see all the many issues that our members are campaigning on, but then I also get to represent the sector and their needs when working with MPs. So ultimately my job is there to build up support for international development in Parliament, and indeed by extension the global goals as well. So yeah, it's kind of been a bit of a weird journey. I almost started by accident on this course, but yeah, it's very much one that I've loved, and it's great to see, like when you see organisations like Results and Global Citizen, and indeed like Oxfam and Save have such a significant impact. It's really heartening to see all the hard work of people paying off. So yeah, that's kind of like a whistle stop tour of why I'm sat here with my Liverpool flags in the background talking to you, incredible people.
Cheers, Paul. That's great. One thing we have had a couple of private feedbacks about that you do still keep fading in and out a wee bit. So I don't know if there's a way of positioning your mouth closer to the microphone and keeping it there. But that would be, I think that a few people would appreciate that. Personally, I can hear you great, but a few people have said. So see what you can do. Okay. We are going to go across to our first question, which comes from Sheffield. Now, we had a problem from Sheffield earlier with the sound, so hopefully that's been resolved. Sheffield, do we have you? Oh, I don't think we do. Hello, Sheffield, say something. No, we still don't have the sound. Sheffield, can you whack it in the chat box maybe? Well, hang on, where's Sheffield? No, Sheffield's off mute. I don't know where the problem is. I think Sheffield's typing something. Hang on. Here comes the question. Oh, the suspense. Don't worry about typos, just bash it in. It'll be good.
What about cut and paste?
No, it's a real question. They're typing it in. Here we go. Right. So there it is. Thank you, Sheffield. Oh, no problem. Technology trips up the best of us as we go. So, Paul, I will read out their question. Nicole from Sheffield says to everyone, why are the SDGs important, and how can we measure progress against them?
Yes, so I'll lift up my microphone, try and talk into this. If this is still an issue, let me know, and then I can just come off the video and I can dial in. That might be a little bit better, but yeah. So why the SDGs important? Well, as you said, Aaron, these were agreed by the whole UN, they were agreed by the whole world back in 2015. And I think it's probably the first time in our history that we've got a roadmap to the end of extreme poverty, inequality and climate change. These replace the Millennium Development Goals, which did help out a lot, actually. We had extreme poverty was almost half. We had child infant deaths of half. Yeah, it was really important progress that was made with these SDGs. The good thing about these SDGs is that these actually now focus on the whole world. So these aren't goals for just developing countries to reach to. These are goals for every single country in the world to achieve. And so there's just much emphasis on the UK achieving these, as there is, say, countries like Nigeria, for instance. So it's a collaborative thing that actually we can all work on together. And the way we monitor progress is that one of the thing about these global goals is that these aren't legally binding. So the UN can't enforce these rules on countries. They're all voluntary. And so the UN has asked each country to come and submit a voluntary national review every 4 years. So every country that's signed up to them has to come to the UN and tell them exactly how they're achieving these. And as you said, this year is the UK's turn.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We are going to go across now to Linlithgow for the second question.
Good evening, Paul. I don't know whether you've got Scottish connections with your name, Abernethy, but this is coming from Linlithgow, just outside Edinburgh. The question is, how does voluntarily reviewing progress against the Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations meeting in July make a difference to what countries are able to achieve in tackling poverty? It's quite a lengthy.
Yeah, so first off, we come from the village of Abernethy, I think it's just south of Perth. But that's many generations ago. I've been meaning to go up there as well at some point soon. So I think the Voluntary National Review, or the VNR, sorry, I talk in a lot of acronyms. I'm quite conscious of this, so if I do start mouthing off acronyms, please do stop me and I can explain what it is. But yeah, essentially the Voluntary National Review is important because I think the global goal, we've never really been this ambitious before with things like the global goals. These are really ambitious targets, which are going to be quite hard to achieve. And I think the good thing about the VNR is that it shows us not just how much progress we've made, but actually where the gaps are as well. And I think one thing that's certainly that's come to light since we've agreed the global goals and started doing these reviews is that actually there's a real data issue with a lot of these goals. And I think actually countries really need to start working out how they map certain data in order to see how they're doing as well. So that's one good thing about the VNR is actually it's starting to show us where the gaps are in our information. I think these are really good as well to kind of kickstart countries into taking them seriously. So there have been some really good reviews in the past. I know Ireland's review was quite substantial and had some really strong recommendations in it. It really helps countries galvanize around the global goals and actually demonstrate that no matter what's happened domestically, actually this is the big end goal and certainly by 2030. And so I think it's quite important. It also, the good thing about these VNRs is that the more countries do them, the more information we get on how useful they are, which means actually the next round are just going to get better and better. So it is quite important that actually countries take these VNRs seriously, and we've already learned so much from them. And I think the more we learn from them, the more we're able to actually deliver the global goals by 2030.
Thanks, Paul. That's great. And I think, that point about how the more we do, the better they will get because people learn from each other, I think is really, really important. We're going to go down to Brighton for our third question.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Okay, so our question is, the UK has committed itself to the global goals and already spends 0.7% of our national income on overseas aid. So what is the point of the UK doing a review? Is it realistic to expect it to do more, especially with so much instability in the world and in UK politics for politicians to focus on?
Oh, what a question. I mean, you could ask me this in a pub and I could probably go on for about 3 hours answering this question. I think in a nutshell, so the UK are unique. I think there are a lot of things to be pissed off at with this government and certainly with this country and the way we go about some things sometimes and just our general mess of politics right now, regardless of what party you're in. It's all just a complete shambles. I think one thing we can be really proud of is our commitment to the global goals and our impact around the world in international development. The UK and DFID has one of the most impactful programs in the whole world, and actually other countries, including countries like the US, actually look up to us and actually look up to our leadership on this. So I think it's really important that the UK does a strong VNR because of that leadership element. I think it's, as Aaron pointed out at the start, it's really important that this isn't just a PR exercise. This needs to be an honest reflection because no matter how good the UK is, it can always do better. And I also think that actually, in terms of asking the UK to do more, I don't think we are asking the UK to do more. the good thing about our aid program is it's largely aimed at delivering the global goals. In fact, actually, the global goals have a strong emphasis on leave no one behind, to make sure the most marginalised in the world are always put first. Actually, this came from the UK. This is very much championed from the UK. And so actually, it's not really necessarily asking the UK to do more. It's just about to continue the commitments. Now, is it all perfect? No. I think Aaron was quite right to point out at the start, there are some really big concerns around ODA, and especially who's spending it in the government. There's been some really wasteful aid recently, which makes really bad headlines, and I think it detracts from all the excellent work that happens. So I think a strong VNR can not only re-engage us on the global stage and actually show that we're still a country that takes its leadership of global goals seriously. It can almost like focus the minds and actually show that actually this is what ODA is for. This is what good aid can do. Actually, if we deliver the global goals, it's going to benefit everyone in the world, not just developing countries and not just developed countries.
Thanks, Paul. We're going to open up the floor to broader questions just now. I can see, did I hear somebody going off of you? Maybe, maybe not. But we've got two questions in the chat box which are very similar. Oh, and I noticed, William, was that up in Lithgow? Do you guys have a question you'd like to speak? Because we'll go to you if you like.
Thank you. I read from the notes that the focus this year is on education and work on the economy and growth and equality and climate and peace, justice, secretary and partnership. Have we missed out on some of the, well, poverty is number one and health issues are number two. Will we be restricted to the groups 4, 8, 10, 13, 16, 17, or will Great Britain be addressing the other problems in the presentation, since they haven't done any revision up until now?
Thanks, William.
Sorry,
Paul, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, it was breaking up slightly. I didn't quite get the question. Sorry.
Would Aaron like to?
So it was breaking up for me a bit too, William. I think was it a question around whether the UK is going to be able to focus in on the development related goals, or do we have to do all of them? Was that the question?
Yes. Have we missed an earlier opportunity? Because we're certainly going to be expected to discuss education but nothing else really.
I see.
Whereas number 1, 2, 3, and 5, I think, are all more poverty related, aren't they, rather than partnership and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a question that's quite strongly related to the questions that have also come into the chat box in terms of what the contents of our voluntary national review is going to be, and the tension between, whether it's going to be focusing just on our domestic progress or whether it's also going to be focusing on what we're doing to help other countries to achieve the goals worldwide with our aid. Paul, can you maybe speak to that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the conversations with the governments are ongoing on this. I think there are, it's certainly when we go to report in July, ultimately the report is about our domestic progress. So actually how the UK achieving global goals in this country. That's what it's designed for. However, we have been speaking to the governments and there is going to be an international element to it, which actually shows that actually we're also, as well as providing healthcare in the UK, this is what we're doing to provide health interventions through our aid programs. So the actual report itself is going to be focused on domestic implementation. However, there is worthwhile us reaching out because it's also as I mentioned before, I think something like this, and if we're able to demonstrate to the world our impact on an international stage through the global goals, actually it can really help galvanise support and certainly galvanise a bit more momentum around these global goals, because things have seemed to have fallen off since 2015, and with such a huge donor like the UK stepping up and showing how the important work that it's doing, I think it can be nothing but positive.
Great. Thanks for that, Paul. Sorry, just juggling multiple technology sources at once here. Sorry if I look a little distracted. We have a great question here that has come in from Peter down in Stort Valley. He asks in the chat box if he wants to know if we're at risk of setting a less powerful example due to other government agencies spending our aid less effectively than DFID does. Is that something that we're going to see more of in the UK, remain the same, or reduce? How could that colour our report?
Oh wow, what a question. So yeah, so the it's not helpful to have other government departments spending aid badly. It's not all spent badly. Actually, there are some excellent initiatives undertaken by other government departments, not just DFID, with regards to international development, that do actually really wonderful things. It's just the problem is that when you get less transparent organisations, departments spending on initiatives, that's where the issue comes in. Yes, I think it doesn't help our case at all, and it sets a bad example. I think what was I was quite happy to see is that at the recent International Development Select Committee in Parliament, when the Permanent Secretary Matthew Rycroft was asked to go and talk about the impact of the year, actually he said it's DFID's aim to actually start to be in control of ODA spend, so UKA budget, sorry. So actually, yeah, I think you're right. I think it does set it certainly doesn't help us on the international stage, and it doesn't help our VNR. That said, I think there's a really strong willingness certainly from DFID to make sure that actually any UKA budgets money spent in the UK on international development is actually as transparent as it can. Does that answer your question?
Not really.
Right. Okay.
The question was: is there sufficient initiative within government departments to actually reduce this inefficiency? Is this likely to improve? How is that balance likely to improve in the favour of overseas development?
So yeah, so as I said, there is a really strong willingness from DFID to get other departments in line on this and to make sure they're as transparent as they are. And there is actually willingness so I think when we talk about other government department spend and actually it being an issue, it's mainly from the Foreign Office. Actually, it's most of the stuff you see in the headlines is coming from them. But there is also willingness in the Foreign Office, certainly on the civil society side, to improve this and to improve transparency. So yeah, so I think it's going to be a while yet until we get it to being where we want it to be. Certainly Bond and our members work quite closely behind the scenes with the Foreign Office to ensure that they are as transparent as possible. But equally, we also do a lot of public campaigning with our members to put pressure on the government to ensure that everything that they do is not only transparent as it can possibly be, but always in support of the world's poorest. Where we take issue is when it's not spent in that, when it's spent in the national interest with no clear objectives to the end in extreme poverty. That's when certainly Bond and our members step up publicly. But yeah, I think to answer your question, there is a willingness to fix this. How far we get is another matter. We'll have to wait and see. Thanks, Paul. On the subject of continuing around governments not doing everything they possibly could, particularly our own, I'm going to amalgamate a few of the questions that have come together in the chat because I think they're actually quite strongly related. Birmingham asks about when we report our domestic data,
how fixed are the statistics that we need to provide? Is how much spin can the current government put in to make us look like complete champions when, if you look out your window or read the news, they quite possibly have not done great with poverty in the UK? And related to that, Emily, looking at our own domestic progress, is there something in this process that can really help us with the UK learning good development from other countries and building language and arguments around the criticisms of aid that say we shouldn't spend any money on aid until because we have troubles of our own? There's a kind of a whole kind of complex interplay here between domestic and international, and how reporting can drive the agenda around that. So I don't know if that's a good starting point for answering those questions.
Yeah, so just on the first one, so regardless about spin, so DFID were always clear. So DFID very much hold the pen on all of this. Although other government departments are writing their own sections, DFID hold the pen on this, and they've always said to us that they're keen to make sure this is an honest reflection. The good thing about, we have really good relationships with the team who are helping put this together right now. When I say we, it's Bond and a few of our members. We have a special working group called the SDG working group, which a lot of our organisational members can then join. So it's got organisations like WWF, for instance, in there, WaterAid are in there, who are working with the government on this VNR report. They've said to us that they don't want this to be spun. They want this to be honest reflection, and I do believe them. That said, we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't hold them to account as best as possible. So one thing that we're looking at currently is that as the VNR is put together by the government, we will also, Bond and our members of the SDG working group are going to be putting together a shadow report where actually we are also going to report on the UK's the UK's progress on the SDGs, but actually this is going to be very much internationally focused. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I don't think they want to spin it. However, if they do, we'll be there to pull them up. We're not going to let them. And so, yeah, so I think it's a very short time frame that they've got to do this. But we're in constant communication with the government on this. And I think they realise that it doesn't help anyone if it's spun. And so the second question, I didn't quite get it. So are you talking about the tension between domestic implementation and like?
I don't know, Emily, if you're on the call, do you want to speak to it? Otherwise, I'll just read your question out.
I can speak if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I suppose there were two parts. There was one, does this help the UK learn from others? Because we have our own issues with poverty, and because we're forced to review progress, do we learn potentially from good models? And the other thing was, you constantly hear people saying, why should we give money when we've got problems of our own? I was thinking it could be a good way of building support almost, because we're forced to report on the domestic things. It's about development, but we're also saying whatever, what's it called, universal credit, healthcare crisis, etc. Those are also important to us as a country, and it's kind of building the links really might help to build a case for those that counter arguments against aid. So just whether there was a win in terms of how we communicate our messages, not so much maybe with Penny Mordaunt, but with other people we talk to.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of, does this help us learn from others? Then yeah, hopefully. I think there have been some really strong VNRs that we can learn from. I know France have been up a couple of times now. It was quite telling actually, and it was a bit worrying to see that UK. So the UK doing it this year, we're actually one of the last countries to report on this. Certainly one of the last major economies to report on this, which was a bit worrying, and maybe because of, I'd imagine because the political agenda is full of Brexit right now. Maybe it wasn't high up there, but yeah, it's in terms of helping us learn from others. Yeah, I'd like to think so. I think one thing we're really keen to do is to make sure this is an ongoing conversation. So regardless of what happens in July in the report that's put together, we're really keen to work on the government to make this a living document and to make this dynamic. So actually, it's not just something that we do every 4 years, but it's something that we keep on reporting on. And certainly there's a really good report which I'm happy to share around after this from a group called UK Stakeholders for Sustainable Development, so UKSSD, and they did their own shadow report on how well the UK is doing on the domestic implementation of global goals. They did this last year, and it was launched towards the end of last year, around July time in Parliament, and that was really telling. Actually, that said that, and this partly answers the other question as well. In terms of poverty in this country, it's terrible what you see on the news, and it's horrific the amount of food banks that get used. Yeah, it's horrible, and it is actually it's a little bit relatable to what happens in other countries. I think the difference between poverty in the UK and the poverty abroad in developing countries is that actually there's meant to be a safety net in the UK. Whether that exists or not is another question for another time. But yeah, I certainly think there's comparisons to be drawn there, and it helps us build up the case that actually. I also think it demonstrates to us that actually it's not either or. I mean, we don't have to just focus on domestic. We can do both, and there's money to do both. And so yeah, so I do think you're onto something there in terms of helping to build a narrative around that, and how do we communicate in our messaging. Actually, the UK has problems, but if you look at the wider context and the global goals, actually, it's horrific what's going on in the world, and charity begins at home, but doesn't necessarily end there. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So we've got a couple of questions, which again I'm going to stick together because I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure we get to these ones in particular. I think they're really good. The first one actually comes from Macclesfield, and I think it really speaks to the spirit of results in terms that we quite often are looking for the best in people and in situations. Macclesfield, I don't know who in Macclesfield, but hi, Jay and Sanjay, I'm betting you're in the room. What is the UK best at in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals? What can we be praising people for? And of course, it wouldn't be results if we were also asking what thing do you think we could do better at on the SDGs? So that's one thing. And I think having that information is really useful when we get to the second question, which is from James in Brighton, where he says, we're going to be writing to Penny Mordaunt this month to ask her to attend the high-level political forum on sustainable development. What effect will her attending have, and what specifically can we ask her to do when she attends? So clearly, if the UK is good at something, maybe she could blow the trumpet about that and get other countries to do better the way we do. I don't know. Just some ideas. What do you think, Paul?
Right, so I've actually, earlier this year, based on the UK SSD report, I wrote a brief article on this for Bond, and I will send that report round. I can send round the link to the website, because the website's really helpful, because you can cut down goal by goal on how we're doing. So the UK's not doing fantastically well on it's doing all right on the UK, on the global goals and domestic implementation of global goals. It's doing well on about 24% of them, which doesn't sound great, but they're doing moderately okay on the majority, and there are some which they're doing terribly on. So things like education and healthcare, health coverage, although there are massive issues with, certainly in terms of funding for both, some would argue, actually in terms of coverage across the UK, I think they're doing pretty well. We do have universal healthcare in this country, which is a lot different to actually the vast majority of countries in the world. And so so goals like that we're actually doing pretty well at by the standards of the global goals. What we're the worst at actually, life on land is terrible. Apparently, we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the whole world. It's quite shocking, some of the stats. So things like that aren't great. We're doing well on partnership, which is a great global goal. So civil society engagement, things like that. But yeah, life on land certainly an issue. There's more information in this report, and I can send around the document after this, which just gives a snapshot of how we're doing. But there are some things that we can shout about, but certainly there are some. And I think the problem that we've got certainly in the UK is, as I mentioned before, there's certainly the issue that a lot of countries have is that they just don't have the data to report on it. And that's the case for a lot of these global goals. Actually, and even in the UK, with a country where we record all our statistics. So we got things like the ONS, for instance, the Office of National Statistics. We've got all these institutions that look at these things. Actually, there's still quite a massive data gap. So that's certainly an issue. Some of the goals we can't measure because we just don't know. But I'll send through the rest of the stuff later on. It's
Paul,
quite interesting.
Paul, thanks for that. I think, is that on ukssd.co.uk, and is the report called Measuring Up? Because if it is, then I've sent the link around already.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's
great. Yeah, so that's in the
chat
chat box, everybody. I've popped the link in there.
Great report. Thanks very much.
And I've already looked at a couple while Paul was speaking, and the Life on Land one is full of red lights, red traffic lights. It's not particularly good. Only one green. Okay, look.
Sorry, Aaron. What Paul was just saying does that apply to the UK or does that apply overseas? I'm a little bit confused.
That's just for the UK.
That's just for the UK?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we find out how UK's aid, how effective it is for overseas? I mean, does this report do that? Or
no, this is just on the domestic implementation. So the Voluntary National Review is going to be focused on the domestic element. I think the way you can measure success is through individual initiatives, through different, so their health programs, for instance, their education programs, things like that. They're not, although they're in support of the delivery of the global goals, they're not specific. There is no full mechanism to say they got a green light on education, red lights on health, things like that. It's through individual initiatives, if you get what I mean.
Right, yeah, fair enough. I was just a little bit confused where this applied, if it was UK or overseas. That's what I was confused about. So thanks for that.
Yeah, our shadow report that we're looking to put together will pull in some of these comparisons. So once that's out, I'd be more than happy to come back and talk through that.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Please do that. And we'll absolutely make sure that goes around on our news flash to the whole network as soon as it's ready. One thing I will say, Bentley, just looking at the UK SSD reporting, if you look at the SDG 17 partnership for the goals, there's a bunch of stuff in there on how we're doing around things like developed countries to fully implement their ODA project, including 0.7 and so on. So there is some stuff in there, but it's probably not at the level that we at Results would want to be tracking. But it's a good overview. I'm afraid we've only got 2 minutes left, and we don't want to run over. So I'm gonna start to wrap things up a little bit. I'm going to not read out one more question, but I am going to read out one more comment.
Sorry, Aaron. Sorry, just before you finished, I think there was a question on the effect it'll have to our penny mordants for the BNR.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, no, that's actually probably one of the most important questions of the evening. Please go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it'll have a huge effect. I think one thing that's been lacking with some countries is how seriously they're taking this VNR. And I think we're really, certainly from Bond and our members' perspective, it's really important that we have penny mordants and the domestic minister there to show actually how seriously the UK is taking it. So the more you can put pressure on penny mordant to turn up, the better, because I think it's such a significant. It's very symbolic to have a cabinet level minister there who's responsible for one of the best aid programs in the world. Absolutely.
What do we want her to say, Paul? What do we want her to do?
We want her to be honest. We want her to say, look, we're great at some things, we're terrible at others, but we'll try our best to make sure we improve for next time. It's easier said than done.
That's great. And that's actually a great way to round this out. I will actually just round out with a comment from Macclesfield, which they sort of phrased as a question, but I think is bang on the nose, so I'm just going to read it. Macclesfield says, saying that the Sustainable Development Goals apply to all countries doesn't only mean we have to sort out our own homeless people and poor education outcomes. It means that rich countries have to recognize their own role in poverty around the world. They have to find ways to share intellectual property, to reduce inequality in our country and between countries. We must support technology and economic development in poor countries. We have to help them develop capacity for democracy, for data gathering and other initiatives. And I don't think anybody could have put it much better than that. So thank you very much, Macclesfield. That is what this is all about. Well done for highlighting that for us all. So look, with that, we're 1 minute over. I want to say a really, really huge thank you to you all for being on the call. A really, especially large thank you to Paul for joining us this evening, sharing his expertise and insights into the machinations that are going on to produce these reports and share them. I hope that you all have a better appreciation now for what every country in the world is going through as they tackle the global goals and some of the reporting associated with them, how we're going to be talking collectively and globally about all of this stuff. Do take the action this month. Write to the Secretary of State. You've heard that it's incredibly important that she goes and shows that this is an important thing for the UK as a world leader on all of these issues. And that will go a long way to helping make sure that we have an effective UK voluntary national review of the global goals, because she's not going to go and hand over a crappy, badly written, incomplete report for sure. Thank you. Thank you for all your amazing efforts. I hope you're inspired to get into action so early in January, at a cold January in the UK, to kick off a really amazing 2019 of campaigning. Good night to everybody and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, Aaron. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Night.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
If this national review is about